Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for anyone who loves hearing fascinating tales about remarkable people, intriguing topics, and significant historical events. Our hope is to inspire you to uncover and share your history and your story. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, our guest is Jay Garfield, the 3 times great-grandson of James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States. Jay will share what it was like growing up as a descendant of both President Garfield and First Lady Lucretia. He will tell stories about Garfield's humble beginnings in rural Ohio, his gallant service during the Civil War, his rise through the political ranks, and his strong commitment to the abolition of slavery and the cause of freedom. Jay will also talk about the tragic events surrounding President Garfield's assassination in 1881 and how the medical treatment he received after being shot very likely contributed to his death from infection. Join us as we learn more about the life and impact of one of America's most remarkable and often overlooked presidents. I'd now like to welcome Jay Garfield to our show. Welcome, Jay.
Hey, James, great to be here.
Many of our guests, we really meet for the first time in the interview or maybe a pre-call on Zoom, but Kelly and I had the privilege of meeting you in person several months ago. I think it was back in March. We were both at the opening of the Larry Cook Historian Center for Presidential Research in Pennsylvania, and it was really cool. Larry was also a guest on our show previously, and you and I got to chat, and it was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad that you agreed to be on our show.
It was a great event, and it was a pleasure meeting you and Kelly, and I know Molly enjoyed it as well.
Yes, very good. Your daughter Molly it was also wonderful to meet her, and the fact that the two of you traveled out to that event together, and it was really cool catching up with both of you.
Yeah, awesome. It was so nice meeting you as well.
So, you are the great-great-great-grandson of the 20th President of the United States, James
Correct.
A. Garfield.
Correct.
Yes. And now you're named Jay. Now, how did Jay come about?
So I'm actually named after the president. So I'm James Abram Garfield III. And when I was born, my dad and my grandfather were both alive, and they were James Garfields too. So my grandfather, my dad's dad, it was James R. Rudolph Garfield II, and my dad is James Rudolph Garfield III. And I know it sounds weird, but it's James Garfield III had a James Garfield III, and a lot of people make the mistake of saying, "Oh, you can't be a third because your dad's a third." And he's like, well, it's not generational, it's by name. So yes, I can, just it doesn't happen very often. So my parents were trying to decide what nickname they were going to kind of give me, and they fell upon J-A, so for James Abram. And then I do spell it J-A-Y when I put it down on paper, but when I went into kindergarten, the elementary school said, well, he can't just be J-A. And they said, why not? And I think if it would have happened today, it would be fine. They would accept it. But they said, well, you got to tack on the Y because he's got to learn to spell. Okay. So it's J-A-Y.
I love it. Well, so here's the thing. You talk about going to school. When did you first realize, or when were you first told that you were descended from a president of the United States?
Well, there wasn't really a moment. I think that we always were prepped, I guess, is the best way to say it. There was always books in the house. There were pictures and some memorabilia. The funny thing about our family is that the family doesn't have a lot of memorabilia in the house, mostly because when the house in Menor was given to a historical society by the family, all the stuff went with it. So, I mean, it's kind of a unique historical site in the fact that you go there and about 80% of the artifacts in the house are original to the president. So it's pretty unique comparatively. You know, you go to Monticello or Mount Vernon, and you might get a piece or two that were Jefferson's or Washington's. But you go to Lawnfield in Menor, Ohio, and about 80%, 85% of the stuff there, President Garfield would have maybe had his hands on.
That's interesting. Now, in Menor, is that the house that he lived in right before his presidency, or was that from an earlier time?
Yeah, that's the house that he bought in, oh gosh, I'm gonna flub I'm not sure of the date. They moved from Hiram to Menor, and they bought a small farm there. And then that was originally a smaller home. They added to it when they moved in, and then after his death, Lucretia added more to it. But it was a working farm.
And Lucretia was your 3 times great grandmother.
Correct. Yes.
Right. We'll talk about her in a second. So 3 times great. Which of Garfield's children are you descended from?
We're descended from his second son, James Rudolph Garfield, who, when he grew up, was Secretary of Interior to Teddy Roosevelt. He worked in politics in the state of Ohio as well. And he and his wife lived in the Menor area also.
We're going to talk about this a little later on in the conversation, but I seem to recall that James was one of his children who was with him when he was shot.
Yeah, kind of came in, afterwards, but yes, close. I mean, they wasn't with him when the actual event happened, but was right there just after.
So that's how you're related, and it's kind of known in your house. Did you ever get real curious about who this man was? When did you start to want to know more and sort of dig beneath the surface?
I think it falls back to school. You start doing stuff about American history, and then you kind of realize that you're part of American history, or your family's a part of American history. And then you want to go, well, how was I part of that? I guess the big aha moment, if there was one, was a book had come out by a history professor from Cleveland State, at Dr. Alan Peskin, and basically wrote the definitive book. It was just called Garfield. Very thick book. I have read it. It's a long, arduous read. It's very good. It's very full of facts. It's got the details, but it's written like a history professor would write a book. So, but I mean, if you need to know something, you go to that book, and you can go back to the index and find the page and do that. That book had just come out when I was 13 years old. So it was being debuted at the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland. And we were asked to be there. My parents took us down, and this is a time before, a Nintendo or any handheld distraction device that you can possibly pick up. So we listened to Dr. Peskin talk for an hour, and that's a tough listen for. I was 12 or 13, and so my brother's 2 years younger than I, and so we had to sit there, and it was tough. It was a tough time, but I think for my brother and I, that was the moment when we realized, for the most part, that there's more there than we're giving attention to. And then, so through the years, even for my brother and I, a history thing would come up, and write a thing about someone in history. Well, we wrote a few papers.
I think so. Yeah. Ready made for you there.
Right.
Yeah. You know what? I was looking at some of the birth and death dates of Garfield's children, and I noticed that a couple of them actually, I think, lived into the 1950s. One of them even lived into the late 50s. Did your father or grandfather actually, did anybody ever meet any of the children of Garfield?
My grandfather did. There's pictures when especially when he was a baby, with James Rudolph, and because James Rudolph would have been his grandfather. Mm-hmm. So he definitely, met him and knew him. They actually called him Bum, a family name. Yeah. So
what a nice name.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the house in Menor, The family gave the house to, I guess, what the equivalent of the Western Reserve Historical Society would have been. They gave the house, I believe, in 1936, I
Mhm.
believe.
Mhm.
But there were properties on either side of the house that were owned and lived in by Garfield family as well. So I mean, you have to imagine that after Lucretia basically moved out to Pasadena, the children were still in the area. They used Lawnfield as their collective place. So when everybody was going to get together, they used Lawnfield. And then, so James Rudolph's home and property that was next to Lawnfield was just, I mean, they were next door neighbors, basically. So unfortunately, that house actually burned down. There's no remnants of that, I believe, none left of
Right.
that home. Right. But there's a church that's to the east of the property, and I mean, just east, next door neighbors. That church actually is attached to a home that belonged to my grandfather's mother and parents, and my grandfather was born in that house.
Oh, okay. Now you live in the Cleveland area now, don't you?
Yeah, I live in Solon, yeah,
Okay.
Ohio.
All right. So the Garfields have been in Ohio for a long time.
The Garfields have been in Ohio for a long time. President Garfield and Lucretia spent a lot of time in Solon as well, which is kind of not odd, but kind of retracing his steps a little bit. He was born in Orange, which is just the city that's just north of Solon, which is where the log cabin is. They don't know the exact location of the log cabin. They have an idea of where it's at, but they've never been truly able to find it. But President Garfield's sister lived in Solon, and President Garfield's mother, Eliza Ballou, is actually buried in Solon, in Roselawn Cemetery in Solon. And then there's a Disciples of Christ church that's actually the Solon historical site building, and he preached in that church.
James Garfield preached in that church.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah. Wasn't he a lay minister at one
he
point?
was. He was with the Disciples of Christ.
Right, right. So let's talk about, you talked about where Garfield was born. Is my understanding that his father died when he was quite young? Could you tell us a little bit about his earlier days?
Yeah, I mean, hard Scrabble. He was born in a log cabin. His dad did die when he was very young. So his mom did everything she could to raise all the children that she had, and two sisters and a brother, I do believe. I think I have that correct. They grew up in and around this area that I'm living now, in the Solon Orange area. And he had thoughts of being a sailor that didn't work out too well for him. The only job that he could find on the water was actually driving mules on the Ohio Canal, which he did not really successfully. The odd note is that he couldn't swim,
Ooh.
so he fell into the canal several times from what we've read, and had to be fished out every time. Basically, the last time that happened, he actually got very sick, got ill, and went home, and his mother nursed him back to health, and that was kind of the last time that he was able to go back to that way of life. And his mom said, "Yeah, that's not for you, buddy."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, I mean, fortunately for us, right? He found his dream of knowledge, I guess. He found his calling. He loved to consume knowledge. He was a avid reader. So was Lucretia. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest things they had in common, was that they just read every piece of material that they could get their hands on. And he was just an interesting guy from all that perspective. And I think from where he came from and how he had to grow up, when he started out at the Eclectic Institute, he was a janitor and then taking classes. So he had to scrape up what he had to do to go to get an education, and he did. There's things from his diary. He and Lucretia wrote diaries. I mean, they were avid diarists. They wrote everything, and it's unbelievable the amount of information you can get from their diaries. It's the National Park Service at Lawnfield. They do an incredible job of pretty much every day putting out some interesting diary page from him or Lucretia or even one of the kids, Molly in particular. And it's incredible because you get such a unique perspective of historical events that happened when he was alive, and he would write little things about that. And I don't know if there's any other historical figure that wrote as much as he did in a diary, just personal stuff that he was writing I mean, he wrote every day almost. It was it must have been a hard day if he skipped a day of writing in his diary, and he did from an early age.
Yeah, how fortunate for you and for the country as well, for historians, that those diaries still exist. I know John and John Quincy Adams were also avid diarists, and
Right.
have David McCullough's book on John Adams is just filled with excerpts and quotes from the diaries, but that's a different period in time. So you're talking about somebody who, I guess, Garfield was born in the early 1830s, and you're getting that perspective of what it was like, sort of coming of age in that period of time. Some of the things I've been reading recently about Garfield is that he was a towering intellect. I mean, he was so smart, and he also, I thought it said that so he was working as a janitor, he's doing those jobs, but he was not only taking classes, then he started teaching classes, and then he became the president of
He
the
did.
school in his mid
He,
20s.
he did. He did. Isn't that incredible? I mean, an incredible feat. And connecting all of that stuff, he meets Lucretia there as well. So Lucretia's father is actually one of the people that helped found the school. So now you know, you got the youngest president that Hiram College has ever had, which Hiram College was formerly the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, and he meets his wife there, who her father is responsible for starting the school. So you're like, what a I mean, boom, boom, boom. How these connections start laying into place is just incredible.
Yeah, the other thing that I like to pay attention to is what what these books that I've read have said about his personality traits. And it seems like he was an affable guy, and he liked to give people bear hugs and put his arm around people's shoulders, and didn't sound at all like a sort of a phony politician sort of a thing. It seemed like that was really his heart, that he really liked people, and he was very affectionate that way. That, coupled with a brilliant mind, really
Yeah.
set him up in many, many good ways, considering he was from such humble origins. So tell us more about Lucretia.
So she is so interesting. I mean, definitely an intellectual equal to James, 100%. I guess being born in Ohio at that time for a female was a very fortunate thing, in the fact that there was a couple of places at that time that a lady could get educated. So Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and Hiram, the Western Reserve. And it was for a time when women were being taught how to take care of the house, take care of children, blah, blah, blah. She had that ability, but boy, was she loved to read about new technology and knew what's going on in the world. And she read as much as James did. And she was a very talented artist. She did a lot of artwork. There's artwork that she did that's still in the house in Menor today. She designed, and she had the children help her also, tiles that are around a fireplace in the dining room, and they're still there. And
Oh,
they're still there. So, I think at a time when women weren't talked about, for her, and I mean, I actually just got done watching the series on HBO of John Adams from McCollum's book, And boy, was that, I mean, the series was great. I definitely need to go back and read that, but you see what Abigail Adams, I mean, she was brilliant. And the influence that these first ladies had on their husbands, and Lucretia's no different. I mean, she had an incredible impact on him and what he did and where he went. And it was because she was reading the same things he was. She was doing, she was up on what he was up on, and she did that from an early age. So, I mean, she was a teacher, early in her years, and just the intellectual equal to James Garfield for sure. And he writes about that in his diaries, and he writes, and they wrote letters back and forth. What do you think about this, basically? And that went back and forth between the two of them as well.
I did read in Millard's book, The Destiny of the Republic, that their marriage had some challenges in the beginning. There was some problems for sure, a little bit of distance between them, and yet it began to then they grew together into a very deep, loving, respectful marriage.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Everything that I've read is muddled about that time, like what exactly happened. But in the end, the both of them came out of that period very much attached and very much a partnership, a team, and an extremely loving couple. And yeah, kind of incredible about that part. But you don't hear much about it. They don't write about it either.
Oh,
There's a couple of things that I've read that she wrote, but they're cryptic and kind of like blah blah blah. But that's it. I'm not harping on that.
exactly.
So I don't know how. It's tough because they were apart for long periods of time, and again, I go back just because I've just saw it. The Adams family, they were gone for years apart. He's in France and in England, and she's by herself with the kids and trying to get around smallpox and all this other stuff. And you're like, oh my gosh, she's doing this by herself. She's running the farm. She's doing the kids. It's incredible. And Lucretia did the same thing. He would be gone for months and a year or so, like especially during the Civil War. And she held the fort down, man. She ran the farm. She raised the kids. Just crazy. I mean, that's a big thing.
Yeah. Now you talk about the Civil War. That's another thing. So Garfield enters the Civil War. I understand he was a pretty staunch abolitionist, wasn't he?
He was very much so. As a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass was at the House in Menor several times, and joyfully they hosted the Fisk Singers at the House in Menor a couple of times, and they sang for the candidate for president, for James Garfield, at his house, and they were invited into the house and had sat in the parlor and had lemonade with the Garfields and sang and talked, and I mean, just incredible stuff at the time. And boy, he even, like, if you read some of the stuff during that time, would criticize even Lincoln that he's not taking a harder stance on all of that.
Yeah, and those views were in his heart, deeply embedded in his heart. But also, he was tactically a very good military leader, and I think he rose in rank to, was it brigadier general or something like
Brigadier
that?
General. Yeah, yeah, sure. He read. It was another thing that he read tactics, military tactics. Okay, I'm going to be commanding these troops. Let's see what it's all about. And he outthought and outdid commanders from West Point. So I know that there's other things, that there's other men in history that have done that. But, I mean, if you think about it, he's probably kind of the first that had that. And he had that knowledge because he picked up a book and said, well, what's this about? How do I do this? Where am I going with this? How did this guy take it? And he did it. I mean, he thought that stuff through.
That always astounds me because I've read a lot of books, but there's so many things that I've read that I could never implement myself. I think of
Yeah.
Garfield, but I think of Henry Knox, who I think he owned a bookshop or something, and he ended up being a critical figure in the Continental Army. He brought the cannon down from Ticonderoga, and
Yeah.
everything he learned he got from a book. And Garfield the same way, but still, Garfield's still a very young man when he's in the Civil War, but he ends up after the Civil War, he gets into politics. How did that happen?
Well, he was already into politics. He was a state representative, and Lincoln actually pulls him from the field in the Civil War and says, "Hey, listen, man, I need you in Washington to support me. I'm having a rough time getting things through Congress. I need you back. I need you back here. You need to come back and take your seat." So he basically said, "Yeah, I get it," and he went back to Washington. I guess Lincoln was, he can't say, well, this guy's going to be president someday, but it's like he may have saved his life and got him back but got back into Washington to do some of the things politically that he needed to be done.
Right, exactly. And then there's a kind of a quick leap up to the Republican convention, and Garfield did not expect to get the nomination, did he?
I've read a whole bunch of stuff on this. There were whispers of a possibility of that there was going to have to be some type of dark horse candidate come out of this convention. The biggest problem being, Grant was looking to get elected again for a third time and really being backed by a part of the Republican Party that was a little, I don't even know a good word to use for it. I mean, the New York group wanted to run the country, basically. They wanted to run the country, but they didn't want to be president themselves, which is kind of a funny thought process. I always, that's my one question. Why didn't Roscoe Conkling decide to run for president himself? If that's, you want to run the show, why don't you just want to run the whole show? Why you just want to run New York? But so I think that there was a little bit of wave, and he actually, in his diary and writing to and letters to Lucretia, they talked about that a little bit, and it was the group, the delegates from Indiana, that really kind of had the first whispers out there. Maybe this is the guy we really need, not. And then of course he gets up and he's there to make a speech for John Sherman, senator from Ohio, and he finishes his nomination speech for Sherman, and he finishes with, "What do we want, gentlemen? What do we want?" And delegate from Indiana stands up, "We want Garfield." And he has to calm that down and says, "No, no, no, no. I'm here for John Sherman, blah, blah. Let's stay the course here, boys. We're here for John Sherman." And I think, everything I've read, and of course, maybe you've read a little bit about it too. I think I can only imagine that in Chicago, the whole talk was just, how do we not get Grant and this New York faction into office? It would have been not a good thing to have that happen.
So in 1880, this is the election of 1880, and then Garfield, he wins. As I recall, back in those days, the inauguration took place in March, I think, of the year.
Yep.
So Garfield is elected president. And Lucretia, do you think she was shocked, or was she like, wow, this is great? Or do you have any idea of that?
As a matter of fact, I mean, they wrote about that too. He did have aspirations to be president. He also, and it would be funny to be there at that time to see what the tone in his voice and her voice were at the time. He did not believe that it was proper for a politician to go out and really he wanted the people to want him. He didn't want to go out and change somebody's mind. If they want me, I'm going to go.
Got it.
And so, I mean, that was his thought process through that. Lucretia and James both thought that he could be president, but they they both were like, it's probably not my time yet. It's probably not my time yet. Little did they know, it's his time. So I don't think it was more of a surprise. I think they were a little reluctant. I know that in a couple of her writings that she said, well, we'll get through what we got to get through. I don't know if she was prepared mentally to walk into the White House and be first lady, but she did. And unfortunately for her, she did it with malaria. So she is, in the first weeks of them being in the White House, she's sick and like in bed, full blown malaria. Yikes. I mean, she was really sick. He was very worried that she was going to die from this. And, they're doing everything to help her. And he's trying to deal with Roscoe Conkling at the time. So he's juggling his heartstrings because his wife is not doing well. And then he's got to fight off Roscoe Conkling and that faction of the Republican Party. So I can't even imagine, what's going on at the White House. Because the other thing that they were doing is when the Garfields first walked into the White House, Lucretia basically said, "My God, we got to fix this place up. It's horrible. It's atrocious." And they were in the Library of Congress looking up historically what did the White House look like from the past presidents, and they were going to restore the White House. She was picking out patterns and getting things ready to go. And then when she contracted the malaria, actually that stopped. But that was one of their first things they were going to do. They were going to fix up the inside of the White House because it apparently was a mess.
Yeah, the things I've read about the White House, I mean, historically, there were so many things. The water was bad around the area. There was a lot of livestock around. From what I understand is some of the structure was damp, and sort of didn't smell good, and certainly not a healthy place for anybody, especially somebody with malaria. But so, spoiler alert, Garfield has sadly, a very, very short presidency. And he is the second of four presidents to be actually assassinated. And his presidency only lasted about 4 months, wasn't it, Jay?
Well, 7 to go full before his death, but yeah, 4 where he was up on his feet.
Yeah, 4 was on his feet. Then he was he was inaugurated in March, and on July 2nd is when the shooting takes place. But just backing up a little bit as far as his presidency. So his wife is sick. She wanted to redo the White House. He's dealing with the New York faction, shall we say, the Republican Party. And also there was something back then that was sort of raging full force politically called the spoils system.
Right.
People, looking for presidential appointments to jobs and things like that. But couldn't like almost anybody kind of walk in and petition the president for a job?
And this is an incredible, and he struggled with this part of the presidency. People walked in the front door of the White House and he had to receive them, and they asking for jobs. Hey, listen, I stumped for you. You need to give me a job. And that particular practice went on for a little while. I mean, it was not just unique to that presidency. It went on for a little bit. And Garfield's presidency actually kind of started to turn the tide on that and to get it down, because basically what the whole argument with the New Yorkers was at that point then was that, hey, listen, this guy, I want him in here. I stumped for you. You need to put this guy in because I stumped for you. Well, Garfield was like, I'm the president. I can do what the heck I want to, and I'm not necessarily going to do what you say. But yeah, and oddly then, I mean, Charles Guiteau, the man who shot him, walked through the front door a couple of times there, met the president, shook hands with Chester Arthur, and actually said words to Lucretia. So it's like, well, think about this in all the books that I've read, President Garfield and the presidents, even at the time, would just walk around Washington. Just, I'm going to go for a walk. Okay. By yourself?
Yeah,
There was
yeah.
no Secret Service, and so they weren't going out. They were completely unprotected. That's basically what happened to Lincoln. There was no Secret Service. I mean, there was a soldier outside the door, but I mean, he was half asleep anyway, right? But it's astonishing that there wasn't protection. Like they didn't even think about, like it wasn't even a thought process. Like why do we need to protect you? And again, I'm going to go back to the John Adams books. They even show in the series on HBO, he's walking the streets of Philadelphia looking for his son, and he's not in a good area of town. He's by himself. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and now Lincoln was assassinated about 16 years before Garfield was shot. So you think during that, they had an experience with the president being assassinated. Why there wasn't protection is beyond me. But let's talk about Guteau for a minute. So, from what I understand, he was seeking office. He had delusions of grandeur for himself. He had some failed legal practice, I guess he tried. He tried being an evangelist. He was kind of a little off base in his mental health, and I guess he was upset that he wasn't getting an appointment of some sort. Was that it?
Yeah, he claimed to be a stalwart, which was the faction for Conkling of the Republican Party, and he wrote speeches and gave them on street corners for the election of Garfield. So he felt like he had right to say, "Listen, I want to be ambassador to France." Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean, and there's even in Candace's book, they talk about some of the things that he did was in a kind of a commune, and basically the women in the commune basically kicked him out because he was creepy. It's that kind of thing for him. He wasn't too stable, that's for sure, and painted that way, and himself even painted him that way. He from what writings they had, it just didn't make a lot of sense a lot of times that when he was doing things, even the stuff that he wrote, even the speeches that he gave apparently weren't very well received either. He was kind of all over the place with those.
Yeah, and I think his own sister even said that he was very unbalanced. So he decides that I guess he's getting these thoughts from God or something like that, that he needs to kill the president. So he decides that. So this takes place early July. I think it's July 2nd, and it's at a Washington train station.
Yep.
And Guteau decides this is it. This is the day. And
we stalked him for days too. I mean, like he followed him around. Like he even showed up to church. They were in church, and he stood up and said something. And in Garfield's diary, he writes that a funny little man had gotten up and said some stuff in church.
that was it. That's
Yep.
him. That's him.
Yep, that's him.
So the incident happens. Garfield is shot, and down he goes. And Guteau is apprehended and taken off to jail, and he still thinks, from what I understand, Guteau still thinks he's going to be exonerated, and this was a really good thing he did, and that Arthur's going to be really happy with him and all that. But I think here's the final chapter sort of here, and this is so disturbing on so many levels. Not just that this madman shot the president, but what happens to the president at the hands of people who are trying to help him. Could you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, horrific. I'm a medical professional in my career, so to read some of the stuff that I've read recently, and actually Candace's book brought it more to light even than what Peskin had written, and she just dove into it a little bit more. The thought process in the American medical community at the time, in Europe, you had Dr. Lister, who was preaching antisepsis and got to be clean and we got to keep germs out. And but they can't see the germs. So what are you talking about? What are germs and blah blah? And they say, hey, these things exist, and if we stay clean, we can keep people more healthy. Blah blah. Well, it was creeping into American medicine, but it hadn't really fully taken hold. And so, I mean, if you can imagine, I mean, he gets shot, he falls on the floor in this train station, and one of the first doctors that get to him starts sticking a finger in the bullet wound to try to find the bullet. It's like, what are you doing? Did you wash your hands? No. Do you have gloves? No. And you can imagine that the floor in that train station is not exactly clean, and apparently, I think they brought in like mattresses from somewhere to lay him on at the time to get him to move him or whatever. But you can't imagine those mattresses were clean at all either. And at some level, the doctors were like, well, when the infection really started going and it was oozing and doing all the things, the nasty stuff that it was doing, they thought that was a good thing. Yeah, this is good. This is, it's getting all this stuff out. And you're like, what the heck are you talking about? And in my head, I'm going, oh my gosh. But that was that was kind of the accepted practice, not 100% accepted. Even some doctors were telling Lucretia, hey, listen, you got to stop them from poking their fingers into the wound. They're not, this is not good. This is not healthy for him. And they had a woman, the Garfields did, who was a doctor as well. And Dr. Bliss, the man who kind of took over, really didn't like her and didn't accept her, and basically said, well, you can stick around, but you're a nurse. You're not a doctor. I don't want to hear anything from you. And, you go back and forth with that. And they tried everything to get his temperature down. They had the Navy engineers came in and actually put the first air conditioner into the White House just to try to cool him off. Because again, you're in Washington, D.C. and in August, it's hot. It's hot. And as you said, they're in that swampy area, and the swamp really hadn't been cleaned out, so that's stinky and gross and all that other stuff. So you've got that. You've got him with this raging infection because they're looking for the bullet. And then they bring in Alexander Bell. He comes in and wants to try to find the bullet. Well, Bliss will only let him do one half of the body. Bullets on this half. It's got to be on this half. So they deem Bell's invention a failure, which, not a true test, obviously, because they didn't do the whole thing. And the bullet was on the other side of where Bliss thought it was. So even worse. Maybe, and you don't know, and you can't, you can speculate a little bit, but if they would have left the bullet where it was, me might have been fine.
That's what I've heard. I think the evidence seems to be overwhelming that they were not mortal wounds. But
Right.
at one point, I think there were up to 12 medical people who had probed the wound with their fingers and unsanitized instruments and things like that. It's horrendous. I mean, they weren't giving it a break. I mean, not to get too graphic here, but the infection site became so bad. But one of the things that struck me, a couple heartwarming things, I think, was that despite some political opposition between Grant and Garfield at one point, when I think Lucretia was at the Jersey Shore, I think at the time when she got the news about the shooting, and I think Grant was down there at that time in that area, and that he went over to her and basically, comforted her, and that gave her some sense of comfort that helped her on her journey down to Washington. That was one thing. The other thing was that Garfield was conscious most of the time during the period between being shot in July and then dying in September. And he was always thanking the doctors and thanking the people who were bringing him things and, shaking people's hands. He was still just a nice man.
Yeah.
And considering what they were doing to him.
The pain that he had to have been in.
And Alexander Graham Bell, the other thing I did hear was that part of the reason why the experiment wasn't working, this metal detector for the bullet, was that there was metal springs under the bed, and it was setting off sort of this reaction that was confusing the Bell and the doctors, but it was a good try, shall we say,
Yeah.
to do that. But this guy Bliss, is it true that not only was he a doctor, but his first name was actually Doctor? Wasn't he Doctor
Yeah.
Doctor?
He was Dr. Bliss. Yes.
You can't make it up. But
You can't.
this guy's ego is like the size of a mountain. He didn't want anybody to challenge anything he said. Nobody could
Nothing.
get by this guy.
Well, the worst part about it is that he took over and the president didn't say, I want you. Lucretia didn't say, I want you. He took over, just took over. And then in the end, he sends this astronomical bill to Congress. Hey, you owe me. And the first thing Congress kind of said was, well, nobody asked for you, buddy. You kind of stepped in and took over. And quite frankly, you might be the reason that the president died. And oddly enough, our friend Larry has gotten a document that may even show more what was going on at the time as well. That when Bliss billed Congress, and Congress was trying to not pay him the amount of money that he was, there had to be some affidavits and things signed between Lucretia and some other doctors. And Larry has found possibly a letter to that effect. He's researching it now, which is really cool. I mean, he called me about it and said, "You're not going to believe what I found." And I was like, "Holy cow!" And I said to Larry, "I'm like, hey, this could be groundbreaking to what happened in the end to even Bliss." So I know that he's still working on stuff and researching that whole thing, but it's just funny how this guy ends up, in the situation that he did, and then how, in the end, how bad a care that he actually had for the president.
Oh, it was awful. It really was. And I understand that as the president got sicker, I'm sure even Dr. Bliss realized things were looking very grim, but I think there was sort of a last ditch effort to get him into a healthier environment. So I felt bad for Garfield on so many levels. He was trusting in these professionals, medical professionals at the time, and they had to move him. That must have been an awful taxing experience on his body to put him on a train and send him up to New Jersey. It was close to the end when he got to New Jersey, wasn't it?
It was. It was. But he writes to his mother that, not to worry. There was news reports 2 and 3 times a day coming out on the president's condition. And when he's in New Jersey, the reports they're not good. And he writes to his mother and says, "Hey, don't take heed to what some of the reports are saying. I'm going to bounce back and blah, blah." I mean, obviously he doesn't, but he writes to his mother and says that to her. Don't listen to what people are saying. I'm fine. It's like, no, you're not. But he's saying that to his mom. Mom, don't worry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's not there long, but I've actually stood on the spot. There's a marker down at I think it's in Elberon, that area there
Yeah.
at the Jersey Shore. And there's a little marker just in a little beach house area that marks the spot where the house was, where he passed away. When you stand there, it's kind of an emotional feeling. You just picture, this beautiful area, but this very, very sick man. So he does pass away, and Arthur does become president. And Arthur, from what I've gathered, I keep mentioning Candace Millard's book, but it sort of suggests that maybe he wasn't as much of a patsy for Conkling, maybe as you may have thought originally. He did sort of become. He seemed a lot better than maybe people gave him credit for, becoming more of his own man, and he seemed to be very much grieving what happened to Garfield, as opposed to relishing it, like some thought that
Right.
it might have been. Right?
Yeah. And I guess there's lots of theories out there about where the change came. And I think at some level, I mean, Arthur's from New York. I think, there could have been a thing for him where he was just trying to stay in the political light and do what he needed to do because he was in New York. I'm going to be friends with Conkling, and I'm going to get along at some level. I think that for him, that could have been his thought process. But yeah, I mean, after the president's death, I mean, he kind of took the civil reform and moved that forward, and he didn't even get Conkling back into politics. Because the funnier thing about the whole Conkling fray with Garfield is that Conkling and Platt, another senator from New York, resigned in protest, and, and thinking that, oh, that everything will be fine. They'll go to Albany and they'll be put back in the thing. And Albany said, "Thank God you're gone. See you later, buddy." I mean, to their folly, I mean, basically torpedoed their own political career at that point. So I think that helps Arthur in the end, because he doesn't have to answer to Conkling at that point. And the other thing that he was also suffering from an illness that he was going to eventually die of. I can't remember what the illness was, but from what I understand, he knew that he had it. It was early, like he gets through that presidency, and then not too long after that passes.
Right. I remember that. Yeah, for sure. That he only lived, I don't know if it was a matter of months or so. I'm not even sure it was a year that he lived after his presidency. So the president has passed away. Now, Lucretia went on to live quite a few years. She had, all her children. I've seen photographs where it looks like they stayed pretty close as a family. And now you're also a descendant, and there's this whole, this legacy of Garfield. One thing I wanted to ask you, there's a significant, I heard, quite an extraordinary monument marking the grave of the Garfields. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Actually, Lakeview Cemetery. There's several things that are unique about Lakeview Cemetery. One of them is it's such a large cemetery. It's actually in three cities. It's in Cleveland Heights, Cleveland, and East Cleveland. But they erect a beautiful sandstone monument. The country basically rallied around donating money. Elementary school kids would bring pennies to school, and they got this beautiful mausoleum and monument built in Lakeview Cemetery. And just recently, the outside was restored. Growing up, I have seen the monument, and it's been stained by the industrial, because it's so close to Cleveland. So the stone, when I had known it, was black, with little tan notes because of the sandstone's tan. They have recently restored it, and it's tan again. And it's kind of a bizarre thing for me to see it, because you're like, wow, that's what it looked like, when it was first built. And it's magnificent. The inside, the crypt, the statue that you walk into and see this beautiful memorial inside on the first floor is just, it's stunning.
Yeah.
The stained glass, the mosaics, and this beautiful white statue that's in the middle of everything, and it's just it's awe-striking. It's big and it's powerful, and but then you can go upstairs in the monument, and there's an observation deck, and it looks right out onto Lake Erie. I mean, it's unbelievable. You can see the city of Cleveland, right down all the way to the lake, and it's the highest point in the cemetery.
Wow. I'd love to visit it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We'll come up and we'll take you through.
That'd be wonderful, Jay. I want to end with a couple questions for you, if I may.
Sure.
So if you had a chance, I've asked this to a lot of our guests, it's kind of a good way to reflect, particularly on an ancestor. If you had a chance to sit down for an hour with James Garfield and ask him a question or tell him something, what would that be?
It is pretty well known that President Garfield liked baseball. And I'm a baseball player. I played in college, and I'm a big baseball guy. I think he and I would sit down and talk about baseball. I mean, there's no question about it. He wrote several times that when he was in Congress that he would take a break and go down to the National Mall area where there was baseball games being played. and he would go down and watch baseball. And I think he would have just enjoyed seeing his great grandson play baseball. And I would have loved it. I would have loved talking about baseball with him. I think it would been unbelievable to have James A. Garfield talking to James A. Garfield about baseball. A lot.
Great. I love that. And then another one for you. Had Charles Guiteau not shot James A. Garfield, President Garfield, how do you think history might have changed?
I've told you before, this question has been asked several times. And the thought process is it's actually a hard thought process because he was so well-rounded. He had knowledge in a lot of areas, economically, culturally. So I think that we would have different race relations in this country if he would have stayed alive. I think that, but I also think that of Lincoln. I think there would have been different, we would have had a different pathway from that too. I think economically we would be a different country because of his ideas and his sheer intelligence with numbers that he had. He had a very good head for that kind of thing, how we do things. So I think how we do things money-wise would be different. And I think racially, I think this country would be a lot different. And I think educationally, this country would have been a whole lot different because he was such a big, education. Read, learn it all you can, come at a situation with as much knowledge as you possibly can, and everything will be better. And, he put that into his kids too, that go to school, get your education. So I think education definitely would be a lot different in this country. I think our money situation would be different. And I definitely think the race situation would have been much different.
Thank you for that. And thank you for this interview. And I know that you're also very active with the Society of Presidential Descendants and also the National First Ladies Day Commission. These are things that you're very active with, along with some other people that we've interviewed on this podcast. And thank you for all that you do there. And keep up passing on the legacy. Now, I know I met your daughter, Molly, at Larry Cook's event, and she seems to be interested as well in the family legacy. And I think it's very important that we pass this down, our interest in history, to the younger generations. Don't you agree?
For sure. Well, she's named after Molly Garfield. So I always, growing up, if I had a daughter, James A. Garfield has to have a Molly Garfield.
Right.
So yeah, I hope my wife isn't too bad at me still, but I was pretty staunch about if we had a girl, she'd have to be named Molly.
Now Molly was James and Lucretia's daughter.
Correct. Yes. So out of the children that survived, they also had another. There was the second daughter, but Molly's the one that survived to adulthood, and she was there in the White House when they went to the White House. She was there.
Right. Well, listen, this has been great. It's so cool to talk to somebody who's part of the family, descendant of a president who. He was an amazing person, but sadly, because he was only in office just those few months, I guess a lot of people don't know about him. So I'm glad you're helping tell the story. I hope you continue to do that.
I will, for sure. His impact, not only nationally, but I mean, he really impacted Ohio as well. So to be a good son of Ohio and to have that legacy is I'm really honored and lucky to have him in my family.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you again for all the information and taking the time out to speak with us.
I had a great time.
All right, Jay, have a great day, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your History, Your Story. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram to stay connected. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions, comments, or a story to share. Until next time, be well and God bless.